Soulslike. It's a recent genre that has gained attention beginning in the 2010s. A genre famous for its brutality, titles under it have made their mark as some of the most popular games today. The genre has gone through many evolutions, debates, and its history and impact is currently being mapped by its fans and other video game aficionados. Today, in Forgotten Gems, we explore a long-lost predecessor to the Souls-like genre, an important game that has been lost in time until now. Before we begin, let us first discuss what is a Souls-like. To the eyes of many, games considered as Souls-like seem to be no different from the myriad of hack-and-slash and RPG titles out there. Yet fans of the genre had noted many elements that are unique to a Souls-like game. These include the overwhelming difficulty, the requirement of strategy to survive, the feeling of horror and isolation in its environment, and the awesome and magnificent boss fights. It's not to say that the genre didn't have its critics. Many people disagree on the existence of Souls-like, sparking many debates. To get a more fleshed-out discussion on whether or not Souls-like games should be a genre, the channel Game Maker's Toolkit has a video that can help. Genre or not, Souls-like games have garnered a large fandom. Many of these fans consider the 2009 game Demon's Souls to be the first true Souls-like game, a title where the name of Souls-like was derived from. Video game critics and journalists have attempted to research and track down the predecessors of Souls-like, the games that have influenced the genre to become what it is today. Many critics have dug through various action RPG, survival horror, and hack-and-slash games in an attempt to find the genre's roots. Many games like King's Field and Severance Blades of Darkness were touted as origins of Souls-like games. However, there is also one predecessor of Demon's Souls that is rarely talked about. A game that contained many of what made Souls-like games beloved, almost a decade before the first Souls-like. A game known as Knights of the Temple, Infernal Crusade. Knights of the Temple is a 2004 hack-and-slash game developed by Starbreeze Studios and published by TDK Mediactive Europe. In this game, players control a Templar knight named Paul, who is stationed in the Holy Land. An evil bishop has unleashed a powerful supernatural phenomenon that caused the people in the city to go berserk. And if that wasn't bad enough, monsters have also come out to cause havoc. Paul was one of the only few that wasn't affected by the event, stemming from his innate holiness. Though anyone in his shoes would have already bailed, the brave Paul elected to stay in order to save another female survivor and defeat the bishop. In an article with IGN, Starbreeze stated that they put a lot of emphasis on the weight of each weapons in the game. The audio, the blood, and the reaction of both Paul and his enemies during fights needed to sync perfectly. At first glance, the game seems to be a generic hack-and-slash game. Players have a sword, some spells, and buttons for blocks, light, and heavy attacks. One might be thinking, what makes this game a Souls-like? Upon closer inspection, one can see the difference between Knights of the Temple and other games of its time. Paul is a boots-on-the-ground fighter. He doesn't flip or dash like in other swashbuckling games. Every movement he makes needs to be precise, especially when up against multiple opponents. Every strike that Paul makes feels heavy and powerful, courtesy of the game's amazing graphics and audio. What makes this game a predecessor of Souls-like is its premise. Knights of the Temple is not really a hack-and-slash game. It's more like a survival horror game. It uses fixed camera angles like the old Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. There's also a terrifying vibe whenever Paul is squaring up against his enemies. And while the game does not have any guns, healing items cannot be stored. Then there's the claustrophobic environments and the puzzles that Paul has to complete. As Paul progresses in his mission, exploring the environment further and defeating bosses, he unlocks new weapons and abilities. There's a variety of weapons from swords, maces, axes, and bows, and there are also different combos and supernatural skills for a variety of purposes. Yet the game continues to be brutal. Enemies can be relentless, and in harder difficulties, their attacks can easily chip away health, made worse by the rarity of healing items. Knight of the Temple is far from being a Souls-like. Paul's blocks are nigh invulnerable to anyone who isn't a boss, reducing the game's difficulty. The story is as generic as it comes from your typical knight-saving princess tale, and some of the weapons, like the bow and arrow, aren't as useful or fun to use. But still, this game and many other titles in the early 2000s help influence future games that will give birth to Demon's Souls. But even if the game is decent, why is it forgotten? Why has it not gained any recognition? Poor marketing and the changing landscape of gaming might have sealed its fate. During its release, only a few publications reviewed it, and those who reviewed it thought of the game to be old-fashioned and overdone. Hell, only one professional review is available online, a negative one that was written by Eurogamer. Knights of the Temple was released at a time where action games were changing. Prince of Persia had already been released in 2003, and in 2005, God of War would rock the gaming industry and become a legendary classic. Unlike the more realistic combat of Knights of the Temple, these games were fast-paced, agile, and cinematic. They weren't focused on making a game where players control a meek knight in a horror-themed environment. They were focused on creating a blockbuster, where players get to control highly powerful demigods who can barrel their way through obstacles and punch bosses in the face. This cemented Knights of the Temple's failure. A sequel was made a year later by a different developer titled Knights of the Temple 2, and it attempted to copy other hack-and-slash games by removing its tank controls and including RPG-like elements. But this one, too, was a failure. Overall, Knights of the Temple may have been forgotten, but its influences live on in Soulslike and other swashbuckling hack-and-slash games.